The National Conservative Conference is over and couldn't be over soon enough, frankly. It was a distraction and an opportunity to try to undermine the Conservative leader, the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak. I mean, he's easily undermined, perhaps, but I don't think it gives any sense of credibility to our government to have this sort of backstabbing going on in the background. We need to grow up as a country, as a government, and the Conservative Party needs to grow up as well. This isn't democracy. This is gossip, tittle-tattle, and people sloganizing. This is not an example of democracy. And I'll come to the details about what the opposition has said about this conference in a minute. Meanwhile, I think this conference was an attempt by certain people to jockey for power over the head of Rishi Sunak. I think they're looking to the next election and the likely loss of power, and therefore who's going to be the next leader of the Conservative Party. Who cares, frankly? At that point, there'll be an opposition and licking their wounds. And I think Suella Braverman has been making a bold stab to become Prime Minister, and indeed some of the newspapers today have printed cartoons to that effect and little pieces in the paper poking fun at Suella Braverman. Well, you don't need to poke so much fun. It happens automatically. She does it herself. So she was talking about the need to get immigration numbers down and the idea of getting British people to be trained in how to pick fruit. The following day, Rishi Sunak praised the seasonal worker scheme, or the extension of the seasonal worker scheme, very deftly undercutting her. I think we're in the run-up to a serious cabinet reshuffle. Rishi Sunak may have needed Suella Braverman in order to cement his entry into number 10 in the first place, but he doesn't need her now, and I'm sure he's prepared to take a gamble that it's simply not worth keeping her. And this might be the opportunity to soften his approach on the small boats, or rather to widen the issue. I think if somebody like HeatonHarris were to be appointed, then the option would be to broaden that issue about small boats to encompass the EU and other countries, and to hold a serious conference to deal with the threats to our continent that immigration from other countries is going to pose over the next 10 to 15 years, and how the 1951 Refugee Convention simply doesn't deal with this problem. But it's not going to be Suella Braverman who deals with that, or who can manage that. She could barely manage to articulate a speech. She can barely manage to perform properly in the House of Commons. And I don't think it's going to be Kerry Badenoch, because she has stumbled in the same way, with the Speaker of the House of Commons shouting at her and her behaving like a sulky child. Appalling behaviour from a so-called minister. Disgraceful. So I think they're on the way out. And I think Michael Gove was also making a stab at his own importance in this National Conservative Conference. Dorries, of course, and Rees-Mogg were doing it in the other little conference down in Bournemouth, which nobody really noticed. Now, I think in the House of Commons, there was a reference to the National Conservative Conference as the Conservative Conspiracy Comic Con. And at the dispatch box, Penny Mordaunt was questioned about it, and it was noticed that she was in the Commons answering questions rather than standing on a podium at some fetish conference and banging on a lectern. Deirdre Brock called it, she's the SNP person, she called it extreme far right. The alarming slide, I think she said, of the extreme far right. But as an example of the extreme far right, you simply have to listen to what David Starkey, the historian, was talking about. And he was talking about a confrontation between the Holocaust and slavery, the moral primacy he was talking of the Holocaust and the determination to replace that with slavery. And he was talking specifically about Black Lives Matter and what he called the attempts to destroy white culture and do exactly what was done to German culture because of Nazism and the Holocaust. The problem is I don't see in what he's saying there, in the casual reference that he makes to the Holocaust, I don't see what is so different between his comments and the comments, say, of Andrew Bridgen. I don't like what Andrew Bridgen said. I think he was rightly condemned. But equally, I don't see that somebody like David Starkey should go without equal condemnation for his casual invocation of the Holocaust to confirm his nasty, repulsive snubs. The reality is, of course, that both slavery and the Holocaust are utterly repugnant, and we must learn from both. And, of course, the other thing is that slavery and attempted genocide have coursed through history in one form or another. That the Holocaust was the greatest experience that we in our present age have had of attempted genocide. Utterly, utterly repugnant. And slavery, not only has it been condemned by our parliament in the early 19th century, in the 18th century indeed, but certainly in the early 19th century, but it's also been condemned and condemned since then. And yet it goes on. We have modern slavery, and so many people are enslaved in one way or another. So our experience of slavery is much wider than one particular historical event. Our experience of the Holocaust is much wider than one particular group. But both must be condemned, utterly, utterly. And we should try to stop using these references in such a casual, point-scoring way. So those who do need to be called out. And this is not the same as looking at the camp on the south coast that Suella Braverman visited and then did nothing to help. She left the people there in that camp overcrowded in that array of tents. Of course, that looked exactly like a concentration camp. Exactly. And people there who were housed there must have had a sense of complete despair, not knowing where they were, not knowing where they were going to. The same is true of people caught up in the British asylum system at the moment. The British asylum system leaves people in a state of limbo. Yeah, they're not exactly being put into concentration camps and being threatened with death. They're threatened with expulsion to Rwanda. It's different. But people's experience of misery is personal. And whether that is a misery of with a background of slavery, with a background of the Holocaust, these are different people's cultural experiences. I think we all share the background both of the Holocaust and of slavery as icons of horror in our recent history. And they're things which we must turn away from, and turn away from on a regular basis. So the Holocaust particularly, we should be mindful of the way that hateful speech can so easily lead to worse. Somebody's done an investigation into, I think there's a TV program actually, into the way that social media and Twitter and TikTok feeds in using foul language, racist language, can easily blossom into racist events and vocalizing of racist insults in crowds. They can lead ultimately to murder and appalling abuse. So what happens? What is said on the internet is not something that can be laughed away. The internet, I think, is a very good barometer to judge the way our society is going. And people's posts can sadly encourage actions which I think we are regrettable. So we need to be careful of this. And a nasty, mean little historian who tries to pit one dreadful event against another, this horrible little David Starkey man, he should recognize this is provocative and abusive language. This is language which is drumming up resentment and hatred. And I think he should be as firmly thrown out of the Conservative Party as was Andrew Bridgen.